Welcome to the Bond Business School Business Now video series. My name is Lisa Gouthorpe and I'm the Associate Dean of External Engagement. Today we'll be reinforcing that business fundamentals have not changed despite the challenging time we find ourselves in. Our panel today will focus on the role of strategic purpose and governance. Joining our panel is Dennis Watt, Chairman of the Gold Coast Titans, Stuart Giles, co-founder of the Icon Cancer Group and the Epic Pharmacy Group, and Bond Business School academic Associate Professor Gary Bowman. Well, I'd now like to welcome our guests, and welcome Stuart and welcome Dennis. Thank you for being here. First question to you, Stuart. It's been some challenging times lately, and how have you been coping?
Yeah, look, I think it's certainly challenging is certainly the understatement, isn't it? But I think, for us, we're majority of our business are in healthcare. So for us, our challenges and our questions have really been continuity of service. How do you deliver essential services through this time whilst protecting, your staff, your patients, and everyone else around your environment. So it's allowed us. I think at least we've had that as a focus and a reference point. So I think in the end, challenges there to be overcome.
Yeah, and for us, of course, we're in a really threatened and challenged industry. So we're only out there doing what we do through the good graces of for government in particular, and they've put some fairly strong conditions on us that we need to comply with, and there have been breaches, across the game. But what it does do, it does intensify your focus on why you're doing what you're doing, and at the end of the day, we're a rugby league club aspiring to excel, in the National Rugby League, but doing it in a way that adds value to the lives of all our stakeholders, all our people. And Stuart mentioned that, that care and concern aspect of people who are in your environment, and that's been a major drive for us too. A time of extraordinary insecurity. People are doing it tough. So it is an opportunity and also a necessity to put your arms around your own staff and sponsors, members in the community generally.
It's interesting you mentioned adding value. This is a big concern for us in the business school, and with the field of strategic management, and risk and strategy are really important concepts, and more important now maybe than we've seen certainly in my lifetime. Two things are really important. Our purpose and governance. They're really important moderators of short-term decisions and short-term thinking and some of the long-term aspects that you obviously have to deal with in business. So purpose, I think, is really interesting, and I'm curious for both of you, what you think the role of purpose is in your organisation. So maybe start with you, Dennis.
Yeah, I think, as I said, and this is, we are in a crisis situation, so there are tough times, there are hard times. This is a crisis situation where we're confronting, our own mortality in a corporate sense. So what it does do is, of course, it energises your thinking. It reminds you very, very strongly of why you do exist. From a personal viewpoint, why are we doing what we're doing? Why are we making the sacrifices we're making? And why do we exist as a business? And from us, as I said, we exist, to inspire, if you like, through excellence on field. At the end of the day, you have to run a core business that pays its way. But in essence, that's why we're doing what we're doing. We actually want to uplift the people, within our environment and the community more broadly. And these times are a really strong reminder of why it is you do the things you do, to strive to achieve your strategic objectives.
But that community engagement, I imagine, must be really strong also in the health field too.
Oh yeah, I think we're really. I think in these times you fall back to your core values and your cultural propositions.
Yeah.
We've probably been lucky in on purpose actually being an articulated, stated core value of ours at Icon, and I think when we've had to assess almost every decision through this pandemic, the reference point has been we're here to provide the best care we possibly can to as many people as we possibly can, as close to home as possible. And the definition of possible has changed almost on an hourly and a daily basis in a number of our marketplaces. But if you've, as a purpose reference point, I think it's continued to allow us to frame each and every decision we've had to make it, and hopefully, continue to get it, as right as we can, as often as we can.
Do you think that the crisis has affected those values and the purpose? Do you think it's changed somewhat, or do you think it just made it more resolute?
Well, I don't know about Dennis's end. I think at our end, I would say if you were to have taken a temperature check of sort of values and culture through this, I think it's reaffirmed and reinforced them at nearly every level. And I think that's not only been an organisational outcome. I think we've seen that societally. I think in the main we've probably ended up, right at the moment, we probably care more for each other, and we're probably more, neighbours checking on neighbours, people, reaching out, staying in touch, friends who you otherwise might have let life drift on, or that you're checking in on. So I think that the net outcome at the moment, I suspect, is that we've seen organisational is probably reflective of the genuine sort of response we've seen societally. Dennis?
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Stuart. Actually, listening to you reminds me of my days in newspapers, and I spent many years in newspapers working for News Corporation. So in my mind, I was up at the front end of the paper, which is where the real news was, and the people in sport were in the toy department. And I just had a little flashback then when I heard you talk about the great work you do, and you're actually helping keep people alive. But from our own sake, we do see ourselves as adding to the morale of all those people, who follow us. So, but the work you're doing is obviously very, very, very important, and I admire what you do there. And I think we're probably a pretty good partnership. I think we've got both sides covered.
Yeah, I mean, there's the direct element of the healthcare industry, but I'm a huge sport fan, and I think, like a lot of people, the last few months have been extremely hard, not having the regular game to watch, not being able to engage with that sort of stuff. So, the role of sporting organisations has expanded probably massively now. It's almost become more of a community organisation, maybe in a way that other people didn't appreciate. And, what sort of things do you think are the Titans maybe looking at, post-pandemic?
Oh, I think again, it's about a reinforcement of what you stand for. So, we've had to, curb a number of our community programs. For instance, we've had to curb a lot of our junior development programs necessarily because of the lockdown. So, I think it's just a reinforcement of why we're in those areas and what we actually mean to people. So, if anything, we'll be upping our investment, upping our involvement. In those areas, because we've seen the impact that it has on people. They used to describe religion as the opiate of the masses, but these days it's sport. It really is.
Yeah, absolutely. Another topic that is really important for us is governance, and again, when there's a crisis, that's when sometimes you see the best in people, you see the best in organisations, and you can sometimes see the worst in them as well. I think generally, as you described, people have come together well, and governance obviously has a role in that. But I just want to get your thoughts on how governance in your respective organisations has functioned during this crisis.
Yeah, look, I think it's probably been one of the most interesting lenses to put on how we've managed, and I think it comes to some of the things you'll probably hopefully seek to harness and take beyond the sort of the pandemic response. So the first things were when you're actually dealing with a challenge that came with actually sort of health risk, which comes to organisational risk. So we immediately went to a shadow structure, and for my sins, I was the shadow CEO, which meant that I was no longer allowed to go to the office, interact with anyone from a leadership team directly. So my ability to Zoom, Teams, and WebEx went through a very rapid upskill. But it was really interesting that the flip side of that was almost a war room footing for those who were in the building and making decisions. And one of those decisions was to actually get everyone else out of the building inside 24 hours to work for home. Support for our centres that clearly had no ability to do anything other than instantly work out how do you keep providing care to serious and terminally ill people that's got no ability for time delay or to be set back. So I think that was our first and probably the most significant immediate response. It's fundamentally changed the way that we've dealt with the organisation at a board level. We went from, I think we were probably pretty boardroom 101. We had 4 directors based in Hong Kong, a China-based director. They'd fly in once a month. It was a furious 24 hours in the office. Papers were out, conversations. Moving to, we went to essentially a weekly update call, sometimes ad hoc and called within an hour to deal with an immediate matter. But in the end, I actually think we're a better functioning board staying closer to the business more regularly than these sort of deep attempts to dive, but you sort of almost sometimes have to do one step backwards to remind yourself where you're up to before you'd go 2 steps forward. So, because as well as dealing with the right in front of you immediate issues, you've still got long-term decisions to make, horizons, sustainability, questions to contemplate. Your rest of your responsibilities don't get to be put in a box just simply because we're dealing with a unique set of circumstances. So that would be the 2 biggest, I guess, take-home experiences that we've had, and I think hopefully both of them will stay with us in one form or another.
Yeah, no, I can see that. Yeah, for us, I guess it just brought a new urgency to the whole corporate governance approach. Which necessarily meant, regular updates, with the board. I guess, one of the big takeouts is communication has necessarily had to be far more regular, and that's upwards, sideways, downwards. But there've been a number of critical things that the board has necessarily had to be involved in, for instance. So it's been I think we'll come out of it pretty much the same, Stuart, probably a more a tighter and more cohesive unit. And I don't think executive have felt pressured or crushed in any way. I think it'd be true that they actually felt tremendously supported and appreciated for helping steer us through these times. Yeah.
It's interesting that you said it brought the board closer to the business. That sometimes I guess the board does get a bit detached and it becomes formulaic. Every quarter checking in, going through the papers, signing off on things, and it makes it much more active, which is great if you've got a good board. Maybe less so if you don't have a great board, but it's interesting that sort of closeness to the business has been helpful.
Stuart mentioned the technology, and the reality is you can rally a board far more quickly with a Zoom call. As such, not the best way to communicate necessarily, but you can rally and organise them, very, very quickly. Unlike the physical presence that's required for all those set board meetings.
I think we've all seen that. I think as humans and the crave of direct interaction, I think real contact will always trump virtual contact because you can just get more cues and you can take more in. But I think what we got very quickly to the other side of was an acceptance that if it was the only available contact mechanism, it actually does bring, certainly in something like a multinational board setting, it actually brings some upsides that you previously weren't harnessing, and that is that if you've got a topic you want to discuss, you can essentially be discussing in 15 minutes, not parking it for 3.5 weeks when everyone arrives, jet lagged and squeezing in 3 or 4 different other agendas on their Australian leg of their whistle stop, year 14 of being a road warrior sort of thing. So I think it has changed some of those dynamics, in a way that I don't think you'd be looking to sort of try and get back to the old days.
Do you think these will be lasting changes?
Oh, I think so. I think we probably found better ways to do our business. I just think too, and Stuart keeps talking about this, that personal connection, and we all need it through this period. But just that feeling of support, I think that we're all in this together, and no one's exempt. I mean, everyone's challenged through this period, and who knows how long it's going to last. But you know, you get back to that human connection. We all need it. We all thrive with it. And yeah, and I do think there's some good takeouts there, you know, for the future. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any business that went into the pandemic comes out and reverts back to being what it was, because you know there will be things that will be kept that are different. There'll be things that, you know, whether that be, you know, how people, where they work from, how they work, how they interact. I think the more fascinating piece for me is the businesses that haven't started yet that are going to be formed in this new environment, and I think there'll be some that will almost take the virtual lead, and they'll, you know, well, we formed this business, we never actually met, we just did everything without an office, and we, you know, we all worked from home and we dialed in, and that was how they built their culture, versus those that are essentially going to, you know, go back almost to the original playbook and find their idea, and they come together and they you know, and it looks more like what we would have traditionally seen as sort of cultural development. Yeah. You know, so I think if you were, you know, if you've got an ability that you had an existing baseline that you can measure against in anything that you're doing, you're going to then say, is this better with everybody doing this by getting in their car, being efficient, driving here, spending a quarter of their day consuming resources, whether they be, you know, energy, time, people, for an output, versus what they've been able to show that can be done. You know, no one's going to not take some of those learnings and I think apply them.
Yeah. It's interesting, that level of adaptiveness of how much resistance there is to go back to the old way versus how adaptive you can be. And then, you know, for some organizations like the Titans, at the end of the day, it's, you know, it's a footy team, right? That you've got to be playing, you've got to have people, you know, in the stands. So, you know, is there any major learnings that you say you and the organization have picked up during this time?
Just reinforced the certainty that football departments should not be allowed to run themselves. So our situation is, in our building, we're split into two, and this is the same with most football clubs. So you've got your whole football department that's existing in a bubble, and then the administration is, you know, the adjoining side of the building. We certainly work better when we work together, because there are all sorts of, you know, personal issues, and yeah, sometimes, you know, it's just so easy to turn to someone. You know, so they've actually got to ring us, you know, and then things move on or whatever. So so we lost a little bit of, you know, a little bit of connection there, despite the usage of Zoom and other technological ways of communicating. You do need to see each other, particularly in a high performance business or high performance environment, I think too. At the end of the day, it's about, you know, a lot of it's about honest feedback. You know, as I say, in the belly and not the back. And you know, it is about creating environments, and you know, we trust is the main criteria. So you do need to have those fairly robust conversations often to unlock, you know, the best performance from your group.
Yeah, that trust is a really an important element of both the governance and indeed the purpose, right? It goes back to how the organization's run, and if you trust the people that you're working with, then, you know, you're in a better position from the start of this. Can you think of any major lessons that you've learned from this crisis, and how you approach the identity of the firm, and how you run the day-to-day and the longer term operations?
Yeah, look, I think that understanding of your brand capital is really, really, really crucial. As you know, whether it's falling back to your core values and your mission, and understanding, well, how do we need to reframe or protect that, you know, throughout this. You know, we had a really interesting experience because, you know, we're an operator in mainland China. You know, we've got the largest cancer care provider on a standalone basis in Singapore. You know, we were dealing with this in January. You know, so by the time it really arrived here as a domestic reality in mid-March, we had the opportunity to sort of be 6, 7, 8 weeks up the curve of at least some of the things that were going to become, you know, materially important over the medium to longer term, and I think that's been a great reinforcer of needing to, at times ensure that you're sharing learning across your organisation. I think if we were siloed and it had simply been, this was something that our team in China dealt with, and got to Singapore and they sort of dusted off the SARS playbook and started to sort of restrict interaction between our various clinics and our doctors. I mean, we normally always go for the Lunar New Year to Singapore to host all of our doctors coming together. You talk about that human interaction and things. I mean, one of the first things under their protocols was that doctors couldn't start to come together in any setting outside of a clinical environment, because you get an infected doctor at one and all of a sudden you've got 7 hospitals that don't have a cancer physician. So we were, by the time we got into really the sort of the nuts and bolts of what unfolded here in Australia, we were probably benefited from the fact that we're an organisation that shares learnings and supports sort of in a decentralised manner. So that was probably our biggest, I think, learning in that regard.
Yeah, I think one of the benefits of what we've been through is a greater industry collaboration. I think that's necessarily been the case to ensure that we actually have a future, that we have a bright future. So, people have put aside their personal or their corporate or their club rivalries to actually come together for the betterment of the game. And I think that's been refreshing, and I think it's a lesson that needs to be honoured going forward. Albeit, clubs will still compete ferociously on the field, but I do think that's been a significant step forward for our game and for our industry generally. We're all in the same boat.
Yeah, that's one of the things I think is really, really interesting, really important too, that you can, and I think if you're an athlete, you get that. You can have an argument with someone on the pitch and then you walk off and it's your best mates again, right? Yeah. You can have that collaboration and still be, fiercely competitive as well. So it's interesting how some of the fundamentals, they haven't changed, right? It's still collaborative, it's still competitive, there's still purpose, there's still governance. These things can just be updated and, we react to this crazy time, but it makes us stronger, and it certainly seems to have made both your organisation stronger from what I've heard so far anyway.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think Dennis's experiences are fascinating. I think the experience across sporting bodies, leagues and organisations, both here and globally, have been really profound, because I think it's always been an observation that the game was greater than any individual or any team, but I think that was probably because there was always an underlying proposition that the game would go on forever. I think, whereas all of a sudden, as you say, that really, whether it's those sort of exemptions that Dennis was talking about that the Titans have been provided with, whether it's whole organisations, and in the case of the AFL, almost the entire AFL decamping to our doorstep, because people have made a series of sacrifices, because they've actually realised, in fact, that the game will not continue to exist unless you find a totally all-in path to navigate first, and then worry about who gets the 4 points on the weekend and who gets to do what next. So, and I think we've seen that, and that probably comes back to what I mean. I think there's been some fundamental societal shifts as we come out the other end, because people have, I think, had a very, very stark front and centre reminder that there is an awful lot of we're all in this together before you get to your own individual subsets in so many areas.
If I think for me, my big takeout is that leadership, effective leadership really is about caring. It is about caring for people who are part of your team, or part of your club, part of your industry, and you've got to make those deposits with people if you're going to lead them. We talked about trust. If you're going to build those reservoirs of trust. So that people will follow you, and as I said, everybody's suffering to some extent. Whether it's through extended families or parents or lost jobs. It's just an extraordinary time that we're going through, and it is a reminder that we're all in this together. We're all people, and we all, as Stuart says, we all need We all need that human connection, that, you know, someone's in our corner. So I think for us, you know, we've certainly, and we've had some restructuring as part of this too. So there's been, you know, appeal to, you know, our teams to be mindful that, you know, there's a lot of grief. There's a lot of grief for, you know, for hard-working, long-serving colleagues who are no longer with us. There's a lot of doubt and insecurity about, you know, it doesn't matter how hard and effectively I work, that I'm, you know, that I'm still potentially a victim of, you know, of what we're going through. So that's what we've just reinforced with our management and leaders, that, you know, they need to, you know, they need to invest time in people, get to know them as people, to help them through what we're going through. So essentially, yeah, it's about caring for those individuals who, you know, who are part of your team.
Yeah, I think that's such a great message as well, because it is a really hard time for a lot of people. There's a lot of people who are not coming out of this in the best shape, and that's why, you know, for organisations, having that clear purpose, having, you know, these sound governance structures, so you know that if you're losing your job, then you were cared about, and you're losing it for the right reasons, rather than, you know, thinking that it was you know, a bunch of terrible decisions from people that don't know what they're doing, or, you know, that's where these fundamentals start to become, you know, so important.
I think so. I think Dennis's word's the right word. I think people, in the end, want to be part of a caring organisation, and I think the other part is, you know, that if you are having to make decisions, and if some of those decisions end up mean that, you know, there is, you know, either people leaving organisations, the people left behind will see exactly how you treat the people that are leaving, and that has a huge impact on the remaining culture and the go forward, you know, proposition. And I think, you know, that one of the, you know, from a nation down sort of lens, you know, for us going forward, you know, I think the challenge we have here around uncertainty is really significant. I mean, you know, there's uncertainty at the moment with sort of, you know, daily outbreaks and impacts, and the changes that might mean with, you know, whether it's, you know, borders, restrictions, you know, in our case probably for our major impact, you know, our surgery is going to be able to occur for any given day in any given setting. But I think that when you raise your eyes up to the horizon, there's very little people that could say with great certainty, you know, what does next year look like for the, you know, for the businesses they're involved in, the industries they're in, their families, their, you know, kids at school, all of these things. There's just a genuine layer of uncertainty that we've probably never had to compassionately contemplate at this sort of level before, when you're thinking about how do you care for your team. So I think that culture is really important.
Yeah. Actually, we were chatting before too, and Stuart reminded me it's also very important to care for ourselves, you know, and that, you know, that includes, you know, early morning fitness starts, for instance, to get yourself ready for the day, because at the end of the day we've got to sustain ourselves through this period. You know, it's a bit like the oxygen mask in the aircraft. You know, you got to put it on yourself before you can help anybody else. So I think it's very important for leaders to do all that they can to stay well and to stay healthy, you know, mentally, physically. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's increased all of our self-awareness in that way, which is a great thing. I mean, that's a monumental leap forward for a lot of organisations out there to, you know, to think about compassion and think about self-care, and, you know, talk about mental health and physical health and these things which have been traditionally, you know, kept away from the concern of organisations and managers.
So I guess to wrap up this session, I guess from a strategic purpose point of view, Stuart, have you got some advice perhaps for some of the viewers that might be watching this, and how can they get back to their strategic purpose through this challenging time?
Well, I think that, you know, I think great organisations at all times understand what their purpose is, you know. And I mean, we've always been really fortunate. You know, one of the things about building, you know, a national and then international cancer care business is, you know, we've never really had to do an awful lot of work to worry about whether our staff wanted to be there for the day. You know, they've committed themselves into an area of the healthcare system where, you know, it's pretty clear that you're there for the right reasons and what you're trying to do each day for people. But it has meant, when we've looked at other businesses or other parts of the healthcare system that we've been involved in, it's always been really strong for us to say, well, you know, we have to understand, you know, what are we here to do, and how does every decision that we make get framed by that. I think therefore the wider learning for businesses of any size, it can be, you can be self-employed, team of one through to an organisation of thousands of staff. What you will be able to work your way through the learnings of here is that if you didn't know absolutely what your purpose was on the way in the door, you're sure going to have all the information for you by the time you leave to understand what are we here for and who are we here for. And I think that gives you a chance to come out as a better, more relevant, more sustainable business in any field at the end.
Yeah, no, great. And Dennis, from your perspective from governance and obviously being on a board of directors and chairman of a board, what advice would you have for other board members who are leading their board through these challenging times?
Pretty much to value their people. Yeah, try and, as I say, understand, the challenges and difficulties they be experiencing some themselves. But it really is about people and purpose. And as Stuart says, if you don't know what your purpose is going into this, you should know what it is if you're going to come out strongly the other side, and that's as an individual and as an organisation.
That's great. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in to the Business Now series, and we will see you next time.